So up next is Andy Potter. He's a partner at the Ontario Government Consulting at Deloitte. Andy Potter is an associate partner in Deloitte's Toronto office. Andy specializes in consulting to the public sector and focuses on all aspects of financial management. He is a partner in Deloitte's Ontario Government Consulting practice and is also the leader of Deloitte's Canadian Public Sector Analytics practice. Andy has been working extensively across the Ontario Public Service on a series of business analytics projects, including those for the Ministries of Labour, Finance and Training, colleges and universities, Ministries of Labour, Finance and Training, colleges and universities, and for the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. These analytics projects all involve the assessment of data environments, inventory of key data sets, the integration of data sets, and the presentation of results using interactive visualization software. Also a lot of stuff going on. Okay, hand it over to you, Andy.
Well, thank you, Bianca, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm now going to have to try to figure out how to use this Mac. I'm not sure I know how.
Which one's yours? This one?
That's mine. Is it
Okay,
touchscreen or?
let's go. Down here. And then
Perfect.
you're good
And then
to
we'll
go
see
with
if it
this.
advances. I think that Jeff's video probably took at least 5 minutes out of my presentation, so I'm actually going to try to keep my remarks short. And it probably won't be as interesting as his video anyway. In many ways, we probably need to cancel the next 3 presentations and just jump to the City of Toronto presentation to hear what exciting things we have planned in our city. I think, you know, when we started today, I learned something out of the gate, and I think we all did. We have to thank Bianca for that. Big data is big, and open data is open. So I thought, well, let's just park the bus and move on. We've learned what we need to know. My presentation is going to take a different angle than Jeff's. I think his was very much around big data, the volume and velocity of data and what you can do with it. And where I'm going to tailor my remarks is more around the open data side, because we are dealing with both topics today. And you know, I think how I would contextualize this in the context of what it means to government and public service is that there really are a number of key drivers or opportunities, if you will, that help us understand, you know, why is this even a good idea? Why would we do this? And there are numerous examples that I personally or my colleagues have been involved with around the world that start to show, you know, the different dimensions as to why open data is a good idea. Certainly one of the drivers that is frequently referenced is around the need to be more accountable and transparent to citizens. And that's an interesting one because, you know, government's natural culture is actually to keep things close and to not share. And they don't really share with their colleagues. They certainly don't share across the silos of government. So God forbid you actually share with the public. And one of the things that I think we've realized is that whilst this is a really important driver of the open data initiative, it does have very significant cultural and change management implications within and across government. One of my favorite anecdotes from the work that I've done over the last year is the fact that a deputy minister had to sign an MOU with themselves in order to share data from one division to the other, and that's just within the same organization. So, you know, what happens when you get outside of that and to the public? But obviously there are a number of opportunities that present themselves to I think all parts of government that make data sharing more relevant. Now, as I look at this slide, it seems that for some reason in the shuffle, the key statistic on the tagline has been missed, which is just as well I have my hard copy here. This is a really important statistic. An estimate from a leading UK think tank suggests that an improved big data analytics capability could result in savings of between 2.5 to 4.5% of the government's total budget. Just pause and think about the magnitude of that number. I think the example that we heard earlier on in terms of prescriptions in the UK was just one example of how, you know, in using the power of other organizations to help you understand and analyze data. That is part of the value creation opportunity that government has before it. I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about, you know, some of what is going on across the world around open data. You know, some of you probably know more about this than I. There's a few statistics that I think are interesting. The UK is often viewed as being one of the leaders in this space. If you haven't been to data.gov.uk, I suggest you do. I think it's changing the whole time. You know, we understand that there's 1.4 million page views thus far. I checked out the site again today. There's currently 323 apps, and I clicked on one, and before I knew it, I was in the iTunes store, and it wanted me to download. So continual evolution and refreshing of data sets that are available, but more importantly, the apps that are being created, and I'll speak a little bit about that earlier on. I know it's always interesting to know what's going on globally, but also domestically. I think BC is frequently viewed as being the Canadian province that is ahead of most of its peer provinces across the country. Data BC has approximately 3,200 data sets that I believe are currently available. And what's interesting about the release of data is that it allows other sort of startup organizations to take advantage of the data that has been released and do other neat things. So there's an organization focused on the environment and natural resources sector called Hectares BC. And that's an organization that has merged government data with additional environmental data sets. And if you go to Hectares BC, I think it's .ca, you'll see, you know, a lot of geospatial maps, and there's data sets, and I think you can drag and drop if you have the right type of browser. So the opportunity for government is not to figure out, well, what's the totality and scope of what we should be doing, and how should we do it? It's release the data and let the market and let market forces and other organizations shape what is valuable and what is not. So some of you are probably either involved with open data initiatives, or you suspect or fear maybe is the word that you may get asked to be involved. And so what this slide is really covering is just a fairly simple framework, if you will, to think through, well, where do I start? And obviously point number one, gee, go figure, identify the data sets. And I think that this is, you know, probably the hardest piece in many ways, because as I referenced earlier, I do think that there are significant cultural and change management implications that exist around this. And certainly when we've got involved, and I'll characterize it as big data analysis projects, working with departments and program owners who may have spent their entire career working in a program and actually trying to analyze their program in a total way and in somewhat different way, that's a bit of a challenge. So our way of doing work is changing. I mean, the old days, you know, we were really excited if we got a 2 megabyte Excel spreadsheet through email when working with clients. Now we have the capability to far more easily access the whole program database. And if you can do that, then why wouldn't you? Now, that's not to say that you should be opening up entire program databases. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of issues around that. Privacy, as we heard earlier, is a key consideration. So I think it is important to try to set an overarching organizational framework and objective and set some parameters that can be applied uniformly across departments. And certainly make sure that you get input from program owners to understand what the art of the possible might be. And I think what you'll probably find is that some departments, divisions, whatever the frame of reference is, are probably more mature than others, both from a data collection perspective, a data quality and integrity perspective, but also in terms of just general culture and openness to share. So, those are important factors in terms of thinking through where to start. I think once you've got an initial inventory, obviously there is a presentation layer that is important to the public. It is important to be aware of formats of data. As Bianca said, PDF files are the bane of our existence. There's nothing like, getting one of our junior resources to manually rekey a PDF file because we want to analyze it. Not really a best practice. Clearly you will develop data catalogs and portals, and certainly if you go to the UK portal, US portal, data.gov, you'll see examples of that. And as I also referenced, releasing an inventory of data and having thousands and thousands of spreadsheets is one thing, but the extent to which you can package them together and actually have interactive and intuitive visualization tools, I think is important. And then obviously the third piece is the promotion and use of the data and associated publications. So making sure that there is a communication strategy to the public and reinforcing that is important. I know that people are using Twitter today, and certainly as I follow Minister Clement, who would be the federal minister responsible for open data, he's frequently referencing open data hackathons that are taking place, and there's a bigger sort of buzz across Twitter and no doubt other channels around the open data initiative. And as I said earlier on in my comments, I really think that the opportunity for government is to act as the wholesaler of the data as opposed to the retailer, and really let others work through what is valuable and what is not, and let market forces take shape. The next piece I'd just like people to think about is how you would view success as it relates to open data. And I think it's important to not just think about this as the number of sets that are released. Yes, that is one measure, but is that really a measure of value? I would say not. Certainly usage is important. Now, I know when I was in BC recently, and this perhaps is not surprising, and I don't know if it's representative of all jurisdictions, but the usage that they had tracked indicated that internal government users were the biggest users of open data. Because as I said earlier on, they don't typically share, there's mechanisms and barriers to stop doing that, so that was the usage measure there. And obviously there's some times where that's valuable, but you certainly want to make sure that the usage and application of the sets is relevant to the core stakeholders, which is the public. There's 4 things that we've referenced here, which I think you should think about as potential benefits to government. Cost avoidance being one. Who knew that the city of Moscow was in the business of open data as it pertains to building standards, and obviously there's a mechanism there that actually allows you to report and track in infractions, and hopefully if you can proactively mitigate that, avoid future cost as it relates to contract monitoring. Certainly operational efficiency and cost savings is important. There's no doubt in the city of Barcelona example that we saw that just in terms of the management of city operations can enormously be enhanced through open data. The example we have here is from New York City and the Department of Parks and Recreation helping to work through how to optimize pruning operations by mapping the most efficient routes across the city. Our revenue generation and economic development, I think, is very, very important, and that was certainly one of the main messages that I took out of the Barcelona example. The ability to collect fees at the curbside for garbage collection. What an opportunity that is. The example that we have here is in Ottawa. with respect to the Ottawa Recreation Guide, an app that actually has some revenue-generating capability at source for the city. And then obviously customer satisfaction. I think that given the relative newness of open data, that's probably something that is still in its infancy. But as I said, at the end of the day, you really want to make sure you're releasing data sets that actually add value to your core stakeholders. Final comments I want to make are just around key lessons learned from other jurisdictions. And I'm not going to go through this in detail because by default the recommendation, if you will, is the inverse of the challenge. And I think that maybe Ron McCurley, when he speaks, will reference perhaps some of these things later on, and maybe in the Q&A as to how the province of Ontario, for example, is dealing with this. Certainly, those internal to government, those challenges that we see concern the absence of an overarching direction and strategy. That's very important to have in place. The buy-in I referenced is important too, and that will vary across ministries and/or departments, divisions, and maybe that itself informs the strategy in terms of the sequence in which you try to move things forward. And you may have different objectives in one part of government who perhaps is more open and more advanced than another that is less open. It's not one size fits all. I think that you also have to think through, how much data to release. You don't want to you shouldn't really be thinking about releasing massive program-level databases without understanding truly what is inside them. My colleagues actually did an interesting project in the UK looking at the national pupil database, the entirety of the national pupil database. And the purpose of that project was really to analyze the heck out of it before release so that there weren't any nasty surprises that sort of came out later on in the media. So if you are going big, make sure you understand that you've covered all the bases in terms of understanding what the perhaps potential risks might be. Privacy can be a concern, and obviously, and sometimes I think there's a tendency to do too much privacy assessment. And maybe you have to focus your efforts on those where you think there are the biggest risks. And then finally, just make sure that you are releasing sets that make the most sense to the users of them. Think about maybe a sliding scale of complexity in terms of how to communicate, whether something is simple or complex. And ultimately, make sure that you are proactively engaging with the broader stakeholder community, academia, research partners, app developers, to make sure that everybody is pulling in the same direction. So I apologize, I actually ended up speaking slightly longer than I intended, but that concludes my remarks. So thank you for your attention.